Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Betrayal. Vernon Palmer stared at the papers scattered across the weathered kitchen table of the home he'd built with his own two hands. Divorce papers. After 15 years of marriage, his wife Darlene had decided he wasn't worth the trouble anymore. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent those 15 years building Palmer Construction from nothing, working 80-hour weeks to give her the life she claimed to want. Vernon had suspected something was wrong for months. Darlene's late nights with friends had become more frequent. Her sudden interest in fitness that had her joining an exclusive gym downtown. The new clothes and perfume that seemed excessive for her part-time job at the local art gallery. His suspicions were confirmed when he returned early from a construction site in Ridgemont County after equipment failure shut down work for the day. The black Audi parked in his driveway didn't belong to any of their friends. The sounds coming from their bedroom left no room for interpretation. Vernon stood in the doorway, watching his wife and Roland Blackwood, his business competitor and nemesis since college, scramble to cover themselves. Roland had always been the polished businessman with old money connections, while Vernon had clawed his way up from nothing with calloused hands and determination. "Vernon, this isn't," Darlene started. "Don't insult me by saying it isn't what it looks like," Vernon said quietly, his voice dangerously calm. Roland, recovering his composure, smirked as he buttoned his designer shirt. "Palmer, always showing up at the wrong time. Kind of like your bids on the Henderson project." Vernon's hands curled into fists, but he remained still. "Get out of my house." "Our house," Darlene corrected, suddenly emboldened by Roland's presence. "And soon to be mine alone. Roland's lawyer is much better than anyone you could afford." "You think I haven't been planning this?" Roland added, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your company is facing hard times, Palmer. Everyone in the industry knows it. The bank's about to call on your loans. You're worth nothing." Darlene laughed then, a sound Vernon had once loved, but now cut through him like a blade. "You think I didn't know about your money problems? Roland's been telling me everything. You're finished, Vernon." 15 years wasted on a man who couldn't even keep his business afloat. As they dressed and gathered their things, Vernon remained motionless, absorbing every word, every laugh, every dismissive glance. He made no move to stop them as they left, Darlene pausing only to tell him she'd be back tomorrow with movers for her things. After they left, Vernon sat alone in the empty house, surrounded by framed photos of a marriage that had been a lie. He picked up his phone and dialed his longtime friend and attorney, Bailey Jackson. "They're making a move on the company, Bale," Vernon said without preamble. Bailey sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this. Look, the Henderson project falling through hit us hard, and the bank is nervous. Without a major infusion of capital in the next 30 days, we're in trouble." "She's been feeding him information," Vernon said. "Darlene has known about our finances, our bids, everything. That explains how Blackwood Construction has been undercutting us so precisely," Bailey replied. "Vernon, I hate to say this, but you might need to consider selling before this gets worse." Vernon stared out the window at the land his grandfather had farmed, the land where he'd built his dream home. "Not a chance. I need some time to think." The next day brought Darlene and her movers, efficiently stripping the house of anything valuable. Vernon watched from his workshop, where he'd retreated with a bottle of bourbon. "The art, the silver, the furniture, it's all coming with me," Darlene announced when she found him there. "You can keep your tools and that ratty old chair father left you. That's about what you're worth now." Vernon took a slow sip of bourbon. "You know, Darlene, I always thought you married me for love." "Stupid of me. I married potential," she corrected him. "And you wasted it. Roland's everything you could never be. Connected, sophisticated, ambitious. He's taking me to Paris next week, while you'll be here wondering how to make payroll." As she turned to leave, Vernon called after her. "Darlene, whatever happens next, remember you chose this." She laughed again, that same cutting laugh. "Nothing's going to happen next for you, Vernon. You're done." After she left, Vernon sat in his workshop until sunset, thinking about everything he'd built and how quickly it was slipping away. Then his phone rang. His foreman, Duke Rollins. "Boss, I just heard about Darlene." "I'm sorry. News travels fast," Vernon said. "Small town," Duke replied. "Listen, I'm at Old Man Gunderson's estate sale. His family's selling off everything from his farm now that he's moved to that retirement home. There's something here you might want to see." Vernon almost declined, but something in Duke's voice piqued his interest. "I'll be there in 20. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The Gunderson farm was illuminated by string lights as locals picked through the possessions of a man who'd farmed the land for over 60 years. Vernon found Duke standing beside a rusted metal container about the size of a refrigerator. "What am I looking at?" Vernon asked. "Old Man Gunderson called it his treasure vault," Duke explained. "Nobody's been able to open it. His son says the old man was always secretive about it, claimed it contained something valuable from a war." Vernon examined the container. It was covered in dirt and rust, with a complex locking mechanism that appeared to be custom-made. "What war?" "The old man wasn't old enough for World War II. Vietnam," Duke said. "Gunderson was Special Forces. Came back different, according to his son." Vernon ran his hand along the container. Something about it called to him. Perhaps the challenge of unlocking its secrets, or simply the distraction it offered from his crumbling life. "They're asking $200 for it," Duke said. "Nobody wants it because it's just a heavy piece of junk without the combination." Vernon thought of his near-empty bank account, the payroll due in 2 weeks, and the bank breathing down his neck. Then he thought of Darlene's laugh, of Roland's smirk. "I'll take it," he said, pulling cash from his wallet. Duke helped him load the container onto his truck. "Boss, not to overstep, but with everything going on." "I know," Vernon said. "It's stupid, but right now, I need a problem I might actually be able to solve." Back at his workshop, Vernon examined the container under bright lights. The locking mechanism was intricate, but showed signs of age. As a builder, Vernon had always had an intuitive understanding of how things fit together. He began cleaning the decades of grime from the lock, revealing numbers and markings that had been hidden. For the next 3 days, Vernon barely slept. He researched Vietnam-era military containers, consulted with a locksmith friend, and tried different combinations based on what he learned about Old Man Gunderson's service history. On the 4th day, as dawn broke, something clicked, literally. The lock disengaged, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, protected by rubber seals that had kept out moisture for decades, Vernon found stacks of leather-bound journals, maps marked with locations in Southeast Asia, and a metal box containing old photographs. But what caught his eye was a small wooden crate stamped with military markings. Vernon carefully opened the crate. Inside, nestled in protective padding, were 12 jade figurines, each about 6 inches tall and exquisitely carved to represent different animals from the Chinese zodiac. Vernon gently lifted one, a tiger, its details so fine he could see individual stripes carved into the green stone. Even to his untrained eye, these pieces were extraordinary. Among the papers was a certificate of authenticity dated 1969, identifying the collection as the celestial zodiac of Empress Xiaozhuang, created during the Qing dynasty and looted during the Second Opium War. The document, signed by an art expert from Hong Kong, estimated their value at over $1 million in 1969 dollars. Vernon sat back, stunned. If these were genuine, they could be worth exponentially more today. He immediately called Bailey Jackson, who arrived within the hour accompanied by Willa Tran, an art historian from the local university. "If these are authentic, they're not just valuable, they're historically significant," Willa explained after examining the figurines. The collection was thought to be destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. The art world has been searching for them for decades. "Are they authentic?" Vernon asked. Willa nodded slowly. "I believe so, but we need specialized verification. I have contacts at Christie's who can help. If they're real, we're talking about a collection worth tens of millions, possibly more at auction." Vernon thought of Darlene's words. "That's about what you're worth now." He smiled for the first time in days. "Vernon," Bailey cautioned, "if these are legitimate, there may be ownership claims." The provenance needs to be established. The paper trail leads to Old Man Gunderson legitimately purchasing them from a French art dealer in Saigon in 1969, Vernon said, showing them the documentation. Everything's here: receipts, export permits, even correspondence with museums that turned down his offer to sell back then because they couldn't verify authenticity without the missing Empress's seal, which you now have, Willa noted, pointing to a small jade disc nestled among the figurines. As they discussed next steps, Vernon's phone began buzzing with text messages, all from Darlene. Have you seen the news? The Henderson project collapsed. Roland says you're definitely finished now. Call me. Vernon checked the local news site to find that the foundation of Blackwood Construction's signature project, the one that had been awarded over his bid, had catastrophically failed. Engineers were blaming substandard materials and poor site preparation. Karma, Duke said when Vernon called him about it. Blackwood cut corners to come in under your bid. Everyone on site knew it was trouble. Within hours, news outlets were reporting that Blackwood Construction was facing multiple lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Roland's carefully cultivated reputation was crumbling faster than his concrete. That evening, Vernon's phone rang. Darlene. Vernon, we need to talk, she said, her voice missing its recent edge of contempt. Things with Roland are complicated now. I'm thinking maybe we were hasty about the divorce. Interesting timing, Vernon replied coolly. It's not what you think, she insisted. I've been reflecting on our marriage and Roland's stock is plummeting while his legal troubles mount. Vernon finished for her. I'm not interested, Darlene. You'll regret this, she snapped, her conciliatory tone vanishing. Roland has connections. He'll bounce back, and then you'll wish you'd been more reasonable. Vernon ended the call without responding. Then he called Willa Tran. How quickly can we get these authenticated and to auction? Chapter 3. The Turn. 3 weeks later, Vernon stood in the offices of Christie's in New York City, watching as experts carefully examined each jade figurine. The preliminary authentication had been promising enough for Christie's to express serious interest, particularly given the collection's legendary status in the art world. Mr. Palmer, these are indeed extraordinary, said Lawrence Chun, Christie's senior Asian art expert. We've confirmed they match the documented descriptions of the Empress's collection. The jade itself dates to the correct period, and the carving techniques are consistent with imperial workshop methods. What does that mean in terms of value? Vernon asked. For the complete set with provenance documentation, we're estimating between $30 and $40 million at auction. Possibly more, given the historical significance and the fact that many believe these were lost forever. Vernon felt lightheaded. The amount was beyond anything he'd imagined. There's significant interest already, Lawrence continued. Several museums and private collectors have contacted us since we announced the discovery. We could schedule the auction within 2 months, if that works for you. As Vernon left the Christie's building, his phone displayed 37 missed calls, all from Darlene, who had somehow learned about the jade collection. Vernon had been careful, but news traveled fast in the art world, and with the kind of money involved, discretion was difficult to maintain. He called her back. Vernon, she began without preamble. Why didn't you tell me about the jade figures? Those belonged to both of us. They were found during our marriage. Actually, I purchased them after you served me with divorce papers and cleaned out our house. Vernon replied calmly. The timing is well documented. I've spoken with my lawyer, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. Since your construction company was marital property and you used our joint resources to buy that container, I'm entitled to half of whatever those statues are worth. Vernon had anticipated this. Bailey advised me to keep careful records. The purchase was made with cash that I'd withdrawn for business expenses before you filed for divorce. The bank records confirm it. This isn't over, Darlene hissed. Roland has friends in positions that can make your life very difficult. Later that day, Roland himself called. Palmer, he said, his voice attempting its usual smugness despite the strain Vernon could hear. Let's be reasonable men here. I know we've had our differences, but there's no need for this situation to become uglier than it already is. What situation is that? Vernon asked innocently. Don't play dumb. You've stumbled into a fortune while my company is facing temporary challenges. Darlene is still technically your wife. A generous settlement would benefit everyone. I'm feeling generous today, Vernon replied. So here's my offer. Nothing. You took my wife, tried to destroy my company, and laughed about it. Actions have consequences, Roland. You'll regret this, Roland threatened. I still have friends in this town. One call to the right building inspector, and your projects will be shut down indefinitely. One word to the right banker, and your loans get called in. Interesting, Vernon said. Are you admitting to conspiracy and corruption? Maybe I should record our next conversation. Roland hung up without another word. True to his threat, Vernon's main construction project was shut down the next day due to permit irregularities. His bank requested an urgent meeting about his outstanding loans. 2 of his employees were arrested on trumped-up charges related to equipment theft. Vernon had expected retaliation, but the scope of Roland's influence surprised him. Bailey worked frantically to address the legal challenges, while Vernon focused on protecting the Jade collection, moving it to a secure location and accelerating the authentication process. What Roland and Darlene didn't know was that Vernon had been making his own connections. The Henderson project's collapse had created openings for other contractors, and Vernon had been quietly meeting with developers who'd lost confidence in Blackwood construction. Meanwhile, Christie's had found a buyer willing to make a private purchase of the Jade collection for $38 million, avoiding the publicity of an auction. Vernon accepted the offer, with the transaction to be completed within days. The night before the sale was to be finalized, Vernon received a text message from an unknown number with an attached video. The footage showed men in ski masks breaking into a storage facility, the same facility where the Jade collection had been kept until Vernon moved it 3 days earlier. The message read, "Next time we'll find them." And you? Vernon called the police, but with no actual theft occurring, they took a simple report and advised him to improve his security. He knew who was behind it, but proving it would be difficult. As he drove home that night, a black SUV ran him off the road. Vernon's truck rolled down an embankment, coming to rest against a tree. He managed to crawl from the wreckage with only minor injuries. But the message was clear. This had escalated beyond business and divorce. In his hospital room, Vernon made a decision. It was time to stop reacting and start taking control. Chapter 4. The Plan. Vernon checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice, his arm in a sling and determination in his eyes. The Jade collection sale had been finalized remotely. The $38 million now safely deposited in accounts that neither Darlene nor Roland could access. But Vernon knew money alone wouldn't solve his problems. Roland's vendetta had become dangerous, and Darlene's greed made her unpredictable. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted or until Vernon was destroyed. He drove to a remote cabin owned by his friend Duke, who had insisted Vernon stay there until things cooled down. "They tried to kill you, boss," Duke said as they sat on the cabin's porch, looking out over the lake. "This isn't just business anymore." "It never was," Vernon replied. "Not for Roland. This goes back 20 years to when we were both starting out. He was born with connections I had to earn. He's never forgiven me for succeeding without his advantages." "So what's the plan?" Duke asked. Vernon smiled grimly. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want." Over the next week, Vernon worked with Bailey to set his plan in motion, starting with a carefully orchestrated bankruptcy filing for Palmer Construction. The news spread quickly through the industry and soon reached Roland and Darlene. "He's done it," Roland told Darlene as they sat in his penthouse apartment. "Palmer Construction is officially bankrupt. The banks are seizing everything." "What about the Jade money?" Darlene asked, her focus unwavering. "No trace of it," Roland admitted. "But I have someone at Christie's who says the collection is still coming to auction next month." "Vernon must be using a shell company or proxy." "We need to find out who," Darlene insisted. "That money is partly mine." What they didn't know was that Vernon had arranged for rumors of the auction to circulate while the actual sale had already been completed. The Jade collection was now in a museum in Singapore, with Vernon's name listed as the donor rather than the seller, a strategic tax move suggested by his new financial advisors. The next phase of Vernon's plan involved Meredith Winters, a real estate developer new to the area who had approached both Palmer and Blackwood Construction about a major resort project. With Palmer Construction apparently bankrupt, Blackwood was the obvious choice for the contract. What Roland didn't know was that Meredith had been friends with Vernon since college. Her interest in the resort project was genuine, but her approach to both companies had been Vernon's idea, a way to gather information on Blackwood's business practices. Meredith insisted on unusual contract terms for the resort project, including substantial upfront payments to Blackwood Construction and accelerated timelines that would force Roland to cut corners. Roland, desperate to shore up his company's finances after the Henderson disaster, agreed to everything. He's setting himself up for another failure, Vernon told Bailey as they reviewed copies of the contract Meredith had sent them. When this project collapses, no one will work with Blackwood again. That's a long game, Bailey observed. What about Darlene and her threats? I'm handling that too, Vernon said. He arranged to meet Darlene at their old house, which was now in foreclosure, or so she believed. When she arrived, clearly expecting a weakened Vernon ready to negotiate, she found him calmly drinking coffee on the porch. You look terrible, she said, noting his arm in a sling and the bruises still visible on his face. Roland said there was an accident. Is that what he called it? Vernon asked. Interesting. Please sit down. Darlene remained standing. I'm here to discuss the jade money. My lawyer says I have a strong claim to half. Your lawyer is mistaken, Vernon replied. The jade figurines were purchased after our separation with my personal funds. The sale proceeds are beyond your reach. We'll see about that, Darlene snapped. I've filed motions to freeze all your assets pending the divorce settlement. Vernon smiled. Those assets are already gone. Palmer Construction is bankrupt. This house is in foreclosure. My personal accounts are empty. You can't take what I don't have. You're lying, Darlene said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. The jade collection was donated to a museum in Singapore, Vernon finished for her. No sale, no proceeds to claim. Just a magnificent tax write-off. Darlene's face flushed with anger. You're not this clever, Vernon. I know you. You've hidden the money somewhere, and I will find it. Good luck, Vernon said, rising from his chair. By the way, how are things with Roland? I hear the resort project is keeping him busy. A flash of surprise crossed Darlene's face. How do you know about that? Small town. Vernon echoed Duke's word from weeks earlier. News travels fast. As Darlene left, visibly shaken, Vernon placed a call to Willa Tran, the art historian who had helped authenticate the jade collection. It worked, he told her. Darlene took the bait. She believed the collection was donated, not sold. And Roland? Willa asked. Is about to make the biggest mistake of his career, Vernon replied. Chapter 5. The Counterattack. Roland Blackwood was not a man accustomed to failure. The Henderson project collapse had been a setback, but the resort contract with Meredith Winters promised to restore his company's reputation and finances. He drove to the construction site daily, pushing his crews to meet the aggressive schedule he'd agreed to. What he didn't know was that Vernon had embedded several loyal former Palmer Construction employees within Blackwood's workforce. They reported everything back to Vernon. The substandard materials, the skipped inspections, the falsified reports. Meanwhile, Darlene had become increasingly frustrated with both Roland and her stalled divorce proceedings. Vernon appeared to have nothing left for her to claim, while Roland's promises of wealth and status seemed increasingly hollow as he focused obsessively on the resort project. He's never home, she complained to her friend Casey over lunch. And when he is, he's distracted and irritable. This isn't what I signed up for. What did you sign up for? Casey asked pointedly. From where I sit, you left a decent man who built a life with you for someone who promised you more. Vernon was going nowhere, Darlene defended herself. His company was failing. Was it? Casey pressed. Or did Roland make you believe that to get what he wanted? The question lingered with Darlene long after lunch ended. She began looking more closely at the financial information Roland had shown her about Palmer Construction months earlier. Information that had convinced her Vernon was on the verge of bankruptcy. The numbers didn't add up. According to the bank statements Roland had shared, Palmer Construction should have collapsed long before Vernon purchased the jade collection. Yet the company had continued operating, meeting payroll, and completing projects. Suspicious, Darlene searched Roland's home office while he was at the construction site. Hidden in a locked drawer, she found a folder labeled Palmer Operation, containing correspondence between Roland and several officials. Building inspectors, bank officers, even a judge, all documenting a coordinated effort to undermine Vernon's business. Most disturbing was a recent email discussing the unfortunate accident that had hospitalized Vernon, with Roland authorizing payment to someone identified only as the driver. Darlene felt sick. She had believed Vernon's financial troubles were his own doing, the result of poor business decisions. The reality that Roland had orchestrated a systematic campaign to destroy Vernon, culminating in attempted murder, shook her to her core. As she contemplated her next move, Darlene received a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me at Harlan's Diner at 3 p.m. if you want to know what really happened to the Jade money. Come alone." Curiosity overrode caution, and Darlene arrived at the diner to find Willa Tran waiting in a booth. Vernon didn't donate the Jade collection, Willa revealed after Darlene sat down. That was a cover story. He sold it privately for $38 million. "I knew it," Darlene said, her greed reigniting. "Where's the money?" "Invested," Willa said simply. "Vernon's been buying up properties and businesses around town, including the land for Meredith Winter's resort project." "That's impossible," Darlene protested. "Blackwood Construction already broke ground on that project. On land they don't actually own," Willa corrected her. "Meredith Winters doesn't own it either. The true owner is a corporation called Phoenix Holdings, which Vernon controls." Darlene sat back, stunned. "Roland doesn't know." "No one does," Willa confirmed. "Except now you. Vernon wanted you to know before everything comes to light. He thought you deserved that much, despite everything. Why would he tell me this?" Darlene asked suspiciously. "Because tomorrow, Roland Blackwood will be arrested for fraud, corruption, and attempted murder," Willa explained. "Vernon has turned over evidence to the state attorney general's office, including testimony from the man Roland hired to run Vernon off the road." "And what happens to me?" Darlene asked, her voice small. "That depends on you," Willa replied. "Vernon is offering you a choice. You can align yourself with Roland and face potential accessory charges, or you can sign the divorce papers Vernon's lawyer has prepared, which grant you a reasonable settlement in exchange for releasing all claims to the Jade proceeds, or any of Vernon's current or future assets." Willa slid a thick envelope across the table. "The papers are inside, along with a one-way ticket to anywhere you want to go. Vernon suggests somewhere far from here." After Willa left, Darlene sat alone in the booth for a long time, contemplating her options. By the time she made her decision, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the diner's worn linoleum floor. That night, Roland received an urgent call from his site manager. The resort construction had been shut down by court order, with armed security preventing anyone from entering the site. When Roland arrived, he found notices posted declaring the land the property of Phoenix Holdings. "Who the hell is Phoenix Holdings?" Roland demanded. Before anyone could answer, police cars arrived with warrants for Roland's arrest on multiple charges. As officers led him away in handcuffs, Roland spotted a familiar truck parked across the street. Vernon's truck, with Vernon himself watching from the driver's seat. For the first time, Roland felt fear. Chapter 6: The Revelations. The arrest of Roland Blackwood dominated local news for weeks. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Documented bribes to officials, fraudulent business practices, and the testimony of the hired driver who had run Vernon off the road. Most damning was Roland's own electronic trail, emails, text messages, and financial records that Vernon had somehow obtained. What no one knew was that Vernon had been planning this for months, ever since he first suspected Darlene's infidelity. He had installed monitoring software on their home computers and Darlene's devices, giving him access to her communications with Roland. When they became careless, believing Vernon oblivious, they had discussed everything via text and email, creating a detailed record of their affair and their plans to undermine his business. Darlene had chosen to sign the divorce papers and disappear with the settlement Vernon offered. She left town the morning after meeting with Willa, leaving behind only a short note for Roland that the police found during their search of his penthouse. "You used me to destroy him. Now he's destroyed us both. I'm sorry I ever believed you." Vernon allowed himself one moment of satisfaction before returning his focus to rebuilding. With Roland facing criminal charges and his company in shambles, the construction landscape had shifted dramatically. Former Blackwood clients approached Vernon, unaware that he had been quietly establishing a new company, Phoenix Construction, using the proceeds from the Jade sale. 1 month after Roland's arrest, Vernon held a company meeting at the headquarters of Phoenix Construction. Many familiar faces from Palmer Construction were present, along with new hires and even some former Blackwood employees who had jumped ship. "Some of you have been with me from the beginning," Vernon addressed the group. "Others are just joining our team. All of you are here because you believe in doing things the right way, with integrity, quality, and respect. That's what Phoenix is built on." Duke, now Vernon's operations manager, watched from the side with pride. "Boss has come a long way from staring at divorce papers," he murmured to Bailey, who nodded in agreement. As the meeting concluded, Vernon introduced the company's first major project, a community center on land that had once belonged to Old Man Gunderson, donated by an anonymous benefactor, Vernon himself. "This center will provide childcare, job training, and support services for families in need," Vernon explained. "It's our way of giving back to the community that stood by us during difficult times." What Vernon didn't share was that he had reserved space in the center for a small museum dedicated to local history, with a special exhibition on Old Man Gunderson and his extraordinary jade collection, replicas of which would be permanently displayed. As Vernon walked through the construction site later that day, he found Willa waiting for him beside his truck. "The Singapore Museum sent this," she said, handing him a small package. "They said it was meant for you all along." Inside was the smallest of the jade figurines, the rat, first animal in the Chinese zodiac and symbol of new beginnings. A note explained that the museum's researchers had discovered this was traditionally kept by the collector as a talisman of good fortune. "Seems appropriate," Vernon said, turning the exquisite carving in his hand. "Have you heard from Darlene?" Willa asked. Vernon shook his head. "No, and I don't expect to. And Roland? His trial starts next month. His lawyers are already floating a plea deal, but the prosecutor isn't interested. Too many people were hurt by his schemes." Willa hesitated before asking her next question. Was it worth it? The revenge. Vernon considered this carefully. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice for myself and everyone else Roland had hurt over the years. He made his choices, and now he's facing the consequences. "And what about your choices?" Willa pressed. Vernon smiled slightly. "I chose to rebuild rather than just destroy. That makes all the difference." As the sun set over the construction site, Vernon placed the jade rat in his pocket and turned toward his truck. The future stretched before him, unlimited by the past, but shaped by the lessons he'd learned along the way. "We're building something that will last," he said, more to himself than to Willa. "That's all that matters now." Chapter 7. The Aftermath. 6 months after Roland Blackwood's arrest, the landscape of Vernon's life had transformed completely. Phoenix Construction had established itself as the premier building company in the region, with Vernon's reputation for integrity and quality attracting high-profile clients from across the state. The community center was nearing completion, already drawing attention for its innovative design and community-focused mission. Vernon had expanded the project to include affordable housing units on adjacent land, addressing a critical need in the area. Roland's trial had concluded with a guilty verdict on all charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with additional civil judgments that would claim whatever assets remained when he was released. His fall from grace was absolute, his name now synonymous with corruption and fraud. Vernon had moved out of his old house, unable to separate it from memories of betrayal. Instead, he built a modest cabin on a wooded lot outside town. Nothing extravagant, but crafted with the same care he put into all his projects. The jade rat occupied a place of honor on his desk, a daily reminder of how quickly fortune could change. One evening, as Vernon reviewed plans for a new hospital wing Phoenix had been commissioned to build, he received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Tanner Morris, an old friend who had supported Vernon through the worst of his struggles with Roland. "Evening, Vernon," Tanner said, declining Vernon's offer of coffee. "This isn't a social call, I'm afraid." Vernon set aside his blueprints. "What's going on, Tanner?" "I got a call from police in Charleston," Tanner said gravely. "They found Darlene." Vernon felt an unexpected pang. Despite everything, he had hoped she would start fresh somewhere. "Is she in trouble?" "She's dead, Vernon," Tanner said bluntly. "Apparent suicide. She left a note, and—" He hesitated. "And what?" Vernon prompted. "A confession. Detailed everything Roland did, including her part in it. She claimed you planted evidence against Roland, manipulated everything to bring him down." Vernon's expression didn't change. "Is that why you're here?" "To arrest me for framing a convicted criminal." Tanner shook his head. "No, her claims don't match the evidence. Roland was guilty of everything he was convicted of. The paper trail is clear, but she did raise questions about how that evidence came to light. And you want answers," Vernon concluded. "Not officially," Tanner clarified. "Off the record, friend to friend. Did you orchestrate all of this, Vernon? The Jade collection, the bankruptcy, Meredith Winter's project. Was it all part of your plan?" Vernon was silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the darkening forest. "Would it matter if I did? Roland tried to destroy me, steal my company, and when that wasn't enough, he tried to have me killed. He got what he deserved." "That's not an answer," Tanner observed. "It's the only one I have," Vernon replied. "Whatever happened, justice was served. Roland's victims got closure. The community is benefiting from Phoenix's success. Isn't that what matters?" Tanner studied his old friend carefully. "The Vernon Palmer you knew died the day he found his wife in bed with his enemy," Vernon said quietly. "I had to become someone else to survive." Tanner nodded slowly. "I suppose we all have our breaking points. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about Darlene." "So am I," Vernon admitted. "Despite everything, I never wanted it to end that way for her." After Tanner left, Vernon sat alone with his thoughts. Darlene's death had reopened wounds he thought had healed. The satisfaction of his victory over Roland now felt hollow in the face of such a permanent consequence. The following morning, Vernon called Bailey. "I need you to set up a trust fund using part of the Jade money. Make it anonymous, dedicated to mental health services and suicide prevention." "Is this about Darlene?" Bailey asked gently. "It's about making something good come from something tragic," Vernon replied. "Isn't that what Phoenix is all about? Rising from ashes." In the weeks that followed, Vernon threw himself into his work with renewed purpose. The community center opened to widespread acclaim, bringing needed services to families throughout the region. Phoenix Construction's reputation continued to grow, with Vernon insisting on community benefit components in every major project they undertook. Then came another unexpected development. A letter arrived from Roland, sent from prison. "Palmer, I know what you did. Not just what they convicted me for, the whole elaborate scheme. You set me up perfectly. I underestimated you, and that was my downfall. Darlene's death changes things. I have nothing left to lose now. My appeal is moving forward, and when I get out, and I will get out, we'll finish this between us. You haven't seen the last of me. Roland." Vernon read the letter twice before feeding it into his fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken in the flames. Roland's threats were empty. The evidence against him was irrefutable, regardless of how it had been obtained. Still, the letter served as a reminder that the past was never truly buried. Vernon decided it was time to secure his legacy in more permanent ways. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. 1 year to the day after Roland's conviction, Vernon stood at the podium during the dedication ceremony for the completed community center, now named the Gunderson Community Campus in honor of the old farmer whose treasure had made it all possible. "Second chances are rare in life," Vernon told the assembled crowd. "When we get them, it's our responsibility to use them wisely. This campus represents my second chance, and I'm grateful to share its benefits with all of you." Among the audience was Meredith Winters, who had become both a business partner and close friend to Vernon. After the ceremony, She found him admiring the small museum exhibit featuring replicas of the jade collection and the story of Old Man Gunderson's discovery. "You never told me how he got them," Meredith commented, studying the intricate carvings. "He won them in a card game in Saigon." "If you can believe it," Vernon replied, "from a French art dealer who didn't recognize their value." Gunderson knew exactly what he had, though. He just never found the right time to reveal them. "Like you," Meredith observed, waiting for the right moment. Vernon smiled. "Something like that." Their conversation was interrupted by Bailey, who approached with a concerned expression. "Vernon, there's a situation." Roland's appeal was granted on a technicality. "The judge has ordered a new trial." Vernon's calm demeanor didn't falter. "On what grounds?" "Improper handling of evidence by the prosecution," Bailey explained. "It doesn't mean he'll walk, but it opens the door to reduced charges, possibly even bail while awaiting the new trial." "How soon?" Vernon asked. "Hearings tomorrow. He could be out by the end of the week." The news spread quickly through their small community. Many who had suffered under Roland's corrupt practices expressed outrage at the possibility of his release. Others, particularly those who had worked for Blackwood Construction, remained loyal to their former boss despite his crimes. Vernon maintained his public composure, assuring concerned friends and employees that justice would ultimately prevail. Privately, however, he began preparing for Roland's return. 3 days later, Roland Blackwood was released on bail with a new trial scheduled for 6 months later. His once imposing figure appeared diminished by prison, thinner, grayer, but his eyes still burned with the same intensity when they landed on Vernon at a distance as he left the courthouse. That evening, Vernon received a text message from an unfamiliar number. "We have unfinished business. Blue Heron Point, midnight. Come alone, or I release everything I know about how you set me up." Vernon had expected something like this, but not so quickly. Blue Heron Point was a secluded outlook over the lake, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. The perfect place for a confrontation without witnesses. He considered alerting Sheriff Tanner, but decided against it. This was between him and Roland, a final reckoning that had been brewing for years. At 11:45 p.m., Vernon parked his truck at the trailhead and walked the quarter-mile to Blue Heron Point. The night was clear, with a full moon illuminating the path and reflecting off the still water of the lake below. Roland was already there, standing at the edge of the outlook. He turned as Vernon approached. "Palmer," he acknowledged, his voice raspier than Vernon remembered. "Didn't think you'd actually come." "Let's get this over with, Roland," Vernon replied. "What do you want?" "Justice," Roland said with a bitter laugh. "Ironic, isn't it? That's what you claim to want too." "The difference is, you're actually guilty," Vernon pointed out. "Everything you were convicted of, you did. With a little help from your elaborate setup," Roland countered. "The Jade Collection, Meredith Winters, Phoenix Holdings, it was all orchestrated perfectly. You must have been planning it for months." "You give me too much credit," Vernon said calmly. "I bought a rusty container at an estate sale and got lucky. Everything else was just making the most of an opportunity." "Bullshit," Roland spat. "You manipulated everything and everyone, even Darlene. Her blood is on your hands." Vernon's composure slipped at that. "Don't you dare blame me for what happened to her. You used her. You convinced her I was failing when my business was solid. You fed her lies until she believed them. She wanted to believe them." Roland shot back. "She was tired of being married to a nobody. I just offered her an escape. And look how that turned out for both of you," Vernon said quietly. Roland stepped closer, moonlight revealing the haggard lines of his face. "I know things, Palmer. Things that would make your precious Phoenix empire crumble. Electronic surveillance without consent is illegal in this state. So is accessing private communications." "Prove it," Vernon challenged. "I don't have to," Roland smiled coldly. "I just have to raise enough questions, create enough doubt. My lawyers are preparing motions right now based on information I've been gathering for months. By this time next week, you'll be the one facing charges." Vernon had come prepared for threats, but Roland's confidence suggested he truly believed he had leverage. "What do you want, Roland? Money? Is that what this is about?" "I want my life back," Roland snarled. "The one you stole from me. I want my company, my reputation, everything." "That's not possible," Vernon said. Even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, some things can't be undone. Then I'll settle for watching you lose everything, just like I did, Roland threatened. Starting with Phoenix Construction. By the time I'm done, no one will hire you to build a doghouse. As Roland spoke, he had been gradually backing Vernon toward the edge of the outlook. Now, with a sudden movement, he lunged forward, grabbing Vernon's jacket with both hands. Maybe I'll just finish what that driver started, Roland hissed, pushing Vernon dangerously close to the drop-off. Accidents happen all the time on these trails. Vernon didn't resist. Instead, he spoke calmly. Before you do anything stupid, there's something you should know. I'm not alone. Roland hesitated, his grip loosening slightly. You're bluffing. Vernon shook his head. Sheriff Tanner and 2 deputies are watching right now. I'm wearing a wire, and this entire conversation is being recorded. You're lying, Roland insisted, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Roland Blackwood, came Sheriff Tanner's voice from the darkness behind them. Release him and step back. You're under arrest for assault and attempted murder. Roland's face contorted with rage as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered once again. For a terrible moment, Vernon thought he might still push him over the edge, taking them both down. Instead, Roland released him with a shove and turned to face the approaching officers. You set me up. Again, he said to Vernon, resignation replacing his anger. No, Vernon corrected him. You did this to yourself, just like everything else. As Tanner led Roland away in handcuffs, Vernon remained at the outlook, watching the moonlight on the water below. The confrontation had given him no satisfaction, only a profound weariness and the certainty that some cycles needed to be broken. Chapter 9. The Resolution. Roland's bail was revoked following the incident at Blue Heron Point. His new trial proceeded without him present, resulting in another guilty verdict with additional charges for the assault on Vernon. The judge, unimpressed by Roland's conduct, imposed an even longer sentence than the original. For Vernon, the final confrontation with Roland brought unexpected clarity. The man who had once seemed so threatening now appeared pathetic, consumed by bitterness and unable to accept responsibility for his own downfall. 6 months after that night, at Blue Heron Point, Vernon made a surprising decision. He announced his intention to step back from day-to-day operations at Phoenix Construction, appointing Duke as CEO while Vernon remained as chairman of the board. The company doesn't need me running every detail anymore, he explained to a concerned Bailey. Duke knows the business as well as I do, and he has the respect of everyone in the company. It's time for me to focus on other things. Those other things soon became clear as Vernon established the Palmer Foundation, funded by a significant portion of his jade fortune. The foundation's mission was community development, supporting affordable housing, education, mental health services, and small business initiatives throughout the region. Vernon had come to realize that his most satisfying moments weren't in defeating Roland or building Phoenix into a powerhouse, but in seeing how their projects improved people's lives. The community center had shown him a different kind of legacy, one built on creation rather than conflict. On the first anniversary of the Gunderson Community Campus opening, Vernon hosted a private dinner for those who had stood by him through his darkest times. Duke, Bailey, Willa, Sheriff Tanner, and Meredith, among others. I want to thank all of you, Vernon said as they gathered in the campus dining hall. Not just for your loyalty, but for helping me find my way back to the person I want to be. Back? Duke questioned. Boss, you never left. You just had to take a detour through hell to get where you needed to go. Some detour, Vernon laughed. But seriously, I lost myself for a while there. Got so caught up in outsmarting Roland and Darlene that I almost became as manipulative as they were. The difference, Meredith pointed out, is that you used what happened to build something positive. Roland would have destroyed you and moved on to his next target without a second thought. Sheriff Tanner raised his glass to second chances and using them wisely. As the evening wound down, Willa pulled Vernon aside. Have you heard from the museum in Singapore? They're doing a special exhibition on recovered artifacts, featuring the Jade collection. Vernon nodded. They invited me to the opening. I'm thinking of going, my first real vacation in years. You should, Willa encouraged him. It would bring everything full circle. 2 weeks later, Vernon stood in the gleaming museum gallery, surrounded by the jade figurines that had changed his life. They were beautifully displayed, with detailed information about their history and the extraordinary journey that had brought them from imperial China to a farmer's rustic container in rural America. A small plaque acknowledged Vernon Palmer as the collection's discoverer and donor, though only he knew the full story behind that simple description. As he studied the tiger figurine, his personal favorite with its fierce expression and fluid movement, Vernon felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. The anger that had driven him, the need for vindication and revenge, had finally dissipated. He reached into his pocket and felt the small jade rat that the museum had gifted him. Its smooth surface, worn from his habit of holding it during difficult decisions, had become a tangible reminder of transformation and new beginnings. On his return home, Vernon found the community buzzing with news. Roland Blackwood had died in prison from a heart attack, taking whatever remaining threats and secrets with him. The news prompted Vernon to visit Darlene's grave for the first time, leaving a single rose and a silent acknowledgement of their shared past, both the years of building a life together and the painful end. That evening, Vernon sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The jade rat rested on the small table beside him, catching the last golden light of day. His phone rang. Duke, calling with updates about a new Phoenix project. Everything's on track, boss, Duke reported. Foundation solid. We're ready to build. Good to hear, Vernon replied, smiling at the unintentional metaphor. After all they'd been through, that's exactly what they had, a solid foundation ready to support whatever came next. As darkness fell, Vernon remained on the porch, contemplating the stars appearing one by one above the trees. The path that had led him here had been neither straight nor easy, but he had emerged stronger and wiser for having traveled it. The pile of junk from a farmer's estate sale had indeed made him a millionaire, but Vernon's true fortune lay in what he had built from the ruins of his old life. Not just a successful company or charitable foundation, but a new understanding of himself and what truly mattered. The revenge that had once consumed him now seemed like a distant memory, less important than the life he was creating day by day. Vernon Palmer had lost everything, only to gain something far more valuable, a future defined not by the wounds of his past, but by the possibilities that lay ahead. In the quiet of the evening, with the weight of old grudges finally lifted from his shoulders, Vernon made a silent promise to himself to move forward with the same determination that had carried him through his darkest days, but guided now by creation rather than retribution. The jade rat caught a glimmer of moonlight, seeming to approve as Vernon raised his glass to the night sky. A toast to endings and beginnings, to lessons learned and wisdom earned, and to the unpredictable journey that had brought him home at last. Epilogue, 20 years later. The morning air carried a crisp autumn chill as Vernon Palmer, now in his early 70s, walked slowly along the path that wound through Gunderson Memorial Park. His steps were more measured these days, his once dark hair now completely silver, but his eyes remained as sharp and observant as ever. He nodded to familiar faces, parents with children heading to the community center, seniors using the walking track, young entrepreneurs hurrying to the small business incubator that occupied the east wing of the campus. 20 years had passed since the events that had transformed not only Vernon's life, but the entire community. What had begun as the Gunderson Community Campus had expanded over 2 decades into a sprawling complex that served as the heart of the town. The Palmer Foundation, now one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the state, had funded additions and improvements almost yearly, each one designed to address evolving community needs. Vernon settled on a bench overlooking the central plaza, where a bronze statue of Old Man Gunderson stood, depicted as he had been in life, lean and weathered, with observant eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. The plaque at the base told a carefully curated version of the Jade Collection's discovery and its impact on the community, omitting the more complex and painful aspects of the true story. Few people remembered those details now, Roland Blackwood had become a cautionary tale, his name mentioned in business ethics courses at the local college as an example of corruption's consequences. Darlene's tragic end had faded from local memory, preserved only in courthouse records and in Vernon's own reflections on the price of betrayal and revenge. Vernon removed the jade rat from his pocket, a habit he had maintained for 20 years. The small figurine had traveled with him across continents, through triumph and challenge, its smooth surface now bearing the patina of thousands of touches. Some mornings, like today, he brought it to this bench and contemplated how a single object had altered the trajectory of so many lives. "I thought I might find you here," came a familiar voice. Vernon looked up to see Duke Rawlins approaching, his longtime friend moving more slowly these days with the aid of cane. At 75, Duke had officially retired 5 years earlier, though he remained on the Phoenix Construction Board and couldn't seem to stay away from their major projects. "Beautiful morning," Vernon observed as Duke lowered himself onto the bench. "Gonna be a cold winter," Duke predicted, as he had every autumn for as long as Vernon could remember. "Squirrels are gathering nuts early this year." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, two old friends who had weathered storms together and emerged on the other side with a bond that transcended words. "Phoenix broke ground on the hospital expansion yesterday," Duke finally said. "Tamara insisted I attend the ceremony, even though I'm supposed to be retired." Vernon smiled at the mention of Duke's daughter, who had joined Phoenix Construction straight out of college and now served as its CEO. "Tamara knows your presence matters to the crews. You're a legend, Duke." "Huh, a legend who can barely climb a ladder these days." Duke scoffed, but pride shone in his eyes. Under Tamara's leadership, Phoenix had grown into one of the largest construction firms in the Southeast, renowned for quality workmanship and ethical business practices. "Have you heard from Meredith?" Duke asked, changing the subject. "She called last week from Singapore," Vernon replied. "The museum's 20th anniversary exhibition of the Jade Collection opens next month. She's insisting I attend." "You should go," Duke encouraged. "It's been what, 5 years since you've seen the collection in person?" Vernon nodded. After Meredith Winters had sold her development company and moved to Asia to pursue art authentication full-time, she had become the de facto curator of the Celestial Zodiac collection, working closely with the Singapore Museum to research its history and significance. Her friendship with Vernon had deepened over the years, evolving into a relationship that defied simple categorization. Sometimes romantic, always supportive, and built on mutual respect and understanding of each other's independence. "Willa's giving the keynote address," Vernon said, referring to Dr. Willa Tran, who had risen to prominence as one of the world's leading experts on Asian artifacts. Her authentication of the Jade Collection had launched her career, and she had never forgotten Vernon's role in her success. "She's bringing some of her graduate students. Apparently, they've discovered new information about the Empress's original acquisition of the figures." Speaking of students, Duke segued. "Bailey's daughter got into law school. Harvard, if you can believe it." Old Bailey nearly burst with pride when he told me. Said the foundation scholarship made all the difference. Vernon smiled at the mention of Bailey Jackson, who had retired from legal practice a decade earlier, but remained one of Vernon's closest advisors and friends. The Palmer Foundation Scholarship Program for children of local families had become one of its most impactful initiatives, sending hundreds of promising students to colleges and universities they could never have afforded otherwise. "Bailey's coming to dinner tonight," Vernon said. "You should join us. Bring Elaine." Duke nodded, mentioning that his wife of 45 years would be delighted to see Vernon. Their conversation drifted to community matters, grandchildren, and the upcoming town festival, the easy dialogue of longtime friends with shared history. As morning progressed toward noon, more people filled the park. Several stopped to greet Vernon, a young woman whose small business had received foundation funding, an older man whose family had benefited from the Affordable Housing Initiative, a teenager who recognized Vernon from his visits to the community center's mentorship program. Vernon acknowledged each one warmly, but without fanfare. Despite his wealth and influence, he had never sought the spotlight, preferring to let his work speak for itself. The local paper had dubbed him the Quiet Benefactor years ago, a title that suited him far better than any formal recognition. Almost time for the dedication, Duke noted, checking his watch. Should we head over? Vernon nodded, carefully returning the jade rat to his pocket as they rose and walked toward the newest addition to the campus, a state-of-the-art technical training center that would offer certifications in emerging fields to community members seeking to change careers or develop new skills. The crowd gathered outside. The gleaming facility was substantial, reflecting the community's appreciation for the opportunities it represented. Vernon and Duke took seats in the front row, where Tamara Rollins waited for them, her professional demeanor softening as she greeted her father with a hug and Vernon with respectful affection. Everything's set, Duke asked his daughter. Perfect timing, she confirmed. Sheriff's on his way. As if on cue, Sheriff Wesley Tanner, son of the now-retired Sheriff Tanner who had been such a crucial ally during Vernon's darkest days, arrived in uniform. At 41, Wesley had the same straightforward manner as his father, coupled with a progressive approach to law enforcement that had made him enormously popular in the community. The dedication ceremony began with Tamara welcoming the attendees and explaining the center's mission. Vernon listened with pride, remembering the shy little girl who had visited construction sites with her father and now commanded respect as a business leader. When it came time for the formal dedication, Wesley Tanner stepped forward to unveil the plaque bearing the center's name, the Darlene Palmer Technical Training Center. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. While Vernon had funded dozens of facilities over the years, he had never before used Darlene's name. Even his closest friends looked startled, exchanging questioning glances. Wesley read the dedication inscribed on the plaque, in recognition that everyone deserves a second chance to build a better future. May this center offer new beginnings for all who seek them. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed to tour the facility, Duke pulled Vernon aside. Darlene's name? After all this time. Why now? Vernon considered the question carefully. I've been thinking about endings and beginnings, about the weight of carrying old wounds. Using her name, it feels like setting down a burden I've carried too long. Duke studied his old friend's face. Does this have something to do with your health? The tests. Vernon smiled faintly. 3 months earlier, routine screening had detected an aggressive form of cancer. The prognosis was uncertain at best, a reality Vernon had shared only with his closest circle. Partly, Vernon acknowledged. But it's more than that. I've spent 20 years trying to build something positive from what happened. Using her name completes that circle somehow. Before Duke could respond, they were approached by a young reporter from the local paper, eager for comments about the new facility. Vernon answered her questions patiently, deflecting personal inquiries with practiced ease. As the reporter turned to leave, she asked one final question. Mr. Palmer, you've transformed this community over the past 20 years. What motivated you to invest so much in this particular town? Vernon considered the many possible answers. The complex truth of revenge turned to redemption, the Jade Collection's unexpected fortune, the desire to rebuild what Roland had tried to destroy. Instead, he offered the simplest and most honest response. This is home, he said, and home is worth investing in. Later that evening, Vernon hosted dinner at his cabin, which remained largely unchanged despite his considerable wealth. He had expanded the kitchen and added a sunroom overlooking the lake, but otherwise maintained the modest scale and rustic character that suited his nature. The gathering included his closest friends, Duke and his wife Elaine, Bailey Jackson, and Sheriff Wesley Tanner with his wife Kate. The conversation flowed easily through dinner, touching on community news, family updates, and reminiscences of shared experiences over the decades. As the evening progressed, Bailey raised his glass in a toast. To the Darlene Palmer Technical Training Center. A surprise to us all, but a fine addition to your legacy, Vernon. I've been meaning to ask, Wesley said, his expression thoughtful. Most people don't know the full story of what happened with Blackwood and your ex-wife. My father never shared all the details, even with me. With this dedication, I wonder if you're finally ready to tell that story. A hush fell over the table as everyone awaited Vernon's response. For 20 years, he had maintained a dignified silence about the darkest chapter of his life, allowing the public narrative to focus on his philanthropic works rather than the painful events that had preceded them. There's no single version of that story, Vernon said finally. Roland would tell it one way, Darlene another. Even I see it differently now than I did then. How do you see it now? Kate asked gently. Vernon gazed out the window at the moonlight reflecting on the lake, the same view that had comforted him on countless nights of reflection. I see three people who hurt each other badly. I see mistakes and misjudgments on all sides. And I see how easy it is to become the very thing you're fighting against if you're not careful. You were justified, Duke interjected loyally. After what they did. Perhaps, Vernon conceded. But justification isn't the same as wisdom. I got so caught up in outsmarting Roland that I lost sight of who I wanted to be. Using Darlene's name on the center, it's a reminder that our choices define us, not what others do to us. Dad would understand, Wesley said quietly. He always believed in your fundamental decency, even when he questioned some of your methods. Vernon smiled at that. Tanner Morris, the former sheriff, had passed away peacefully 5 years earlier, leaving behind a legacy of integrity that his son carried forward. Your father was a good man and a true friend. I miss his perspective. The conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics as the evening wound down. One by one, the guests departed until only Bailey remained, lingering over a final glass of bourbon. I filed the paperwork for the trust revisions, Bailey said once they were alone. Everything's arranged as you requested. Vernon nodded his thanks. In light of his diagnosis, he had spent weeks restructuring his affairs, ensuring that the foundation would continue its work long after he was gone. The medical trust is set up too, Bailey continued. The research funding is guaranteed for 30 years, focusing on the type of cancer you're battling. Even if it comes too late for you, others will benefit. That's the idea, Vernon said simply. Bailey hesitated before asking, have you given any thought to reaching out to Darlene's family? With the center dedication, they might appreciate hearing from you. Vernon shook his head. Her sister made it clear years ago that they wanted no contact. I'm respecting that wish. The dedication is enough. After Bailey left, Vernon sat alone by the fireplace, the jade rat resting in his palm as he contemplated the flames. His thoughts drifted to a question Wesley had asked earlier. Was he finally ready to tell his story? Perhaps he was, but not in the sensationalized manner the media would prefer. Over the past several months, as he'd faced his mortality, Vernon had been working on a manuscript. Not an autobiography, but a guide to building community through strategic philanthropy, using his own experiences as case studies without dwelling on the personal drama. The manuscript, nearly complete, rested on his desk in the small study adjacent to the living room. He had titled it simply, Building from Broken Places, a Guide to Community-Centered Philanthropy. Vernon had arranged for its publication posthumously, with proceeds directed to the foundation. It would be his final legacy, not the story of how jade figures made him a millionaire or how he orchestrated an elaborate revenge, but a practical blueprint for others who wish to make a meaningful difference in their communities. Rising from his chair, Vernon moved to the sunroom, drawn to the peaceful view of the moon-dappled lake. His reflection in the glass showed a man aged by time, but unburdened by the anger that had once consumed him. Whatever time he had left, whether months or years, he would continue the work of building rather than breaking, creating rather than destroying. The jade rat felt warm in his hand, as if absorbing and returning his body heat. Vernon smiled, remembering Old Man Gunderson and wondering if the old farmer had ever imagined how his treasure vault would transform not just one life, but an entire community. Some might call it luck or fate or divine intervention that had led Vernon to that estate sale 20 years ago. Vernon preferred to see it as a reminder that opportunities for redemption could appear in the most unexpected places, even in a rusted metal container purchase for $200 on a desperate night. The following morning began like most others for Vernon, coffee on the porch, reviewing foundation reports, and answering correspondence. By mid-morning, he had a visitor, Marissa Oakes, the the foundation's executive director who had started as Vernon's assistant 15 years earlier and proven herself indispensable. The board approved all your recommendations for next year's initiatives, Marissa reported, spreading documents across the kitchen table. They were particularly enthusiastic about the expanded mental health services. Vernon reviewed the materials with his customary thoroughness, asking pointed questions about implementation timelines and community involvement. Despite his illness, he remained fully engaged in foundation operations, determined to ensure its effectiveness long after his guidance ended. "There's something else," Marissa said, hesitating slightly. "A letter arrived at the office yesterday. From Singapore." She handed Vernon an elegant envelope bearing the museum's official seal. Inside was a formal invitation to the 20th anniversary exhibition of the Celestial Zodiac Collection, accompanied by a handwritten note from the museum director. "Mr. Palmer, your generous donation 2 decades ago has allowed millions of visitors to experience these extraordinary artifacts. More importantly, your insistence that the collection remain intact rather than being sold to private collectors has preserved an irreplaceable cultural treasure. We would be honored if you would allow us to recognize your contribution by naming our East Asian Gallery in your honor during the anniversary celebration. Dr. Tran and Ms. Winters have both endorsed this recognition, and we hope you will accept. With deepest respect, Director Chun." Vernon read the note twice, unexpectedly moved by the recognition. He had never sought acclaim for his donation, preferring to remain in the background. The Jade Collection's journey from a farmer's metal container to international prominence had always seemed sufficient reward. "Will you accept?" Marissa asked, knowing Vernon's usual reluctance toward public honors. Vernon considered the question carefully. "Yes," he decided. "I think it's time." Marissa looked surprised, but pleased. "I'll make the travel arrangements. Dr. Tran suggested you might want to arrive a few days early for a private viewing before the crowds." After Marissa left with her instructions, Vernon called Meredith in Singapore. Despite the time difference, she answered immediately. "You knew about the gallery naming," he said without preamble. Meredith laughed, the sound warm and familiar even across thousands of miles. "Guilty. She wanted to be sure you wouldn't refuse outright before sending the official invitation." "You know me too well," Vernon acknowledged. "That's why we work," she replied simply. Their conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering exhibition details, Meredith's recent travels, and Vernon's health. They had developed a rhythm over the years, sometimes together, sometimes apart, but always connected by mutual understanding and respect. "I dedicated the new training center to Darlene," Vernon told her near the end of their call. A thoughtful silence followed. "That's a significant step," Meredith finally said. "Are you at peace with it?" "Getting there," Vernon replied honestly. "One day at a time." After they said their goodbyes, Vernon drove into town for his foundation office hours, a weekly tradition where community members could bring ideas or concerns directly to him. Today's schedule included meetings with the high school principal about expanded vocational programs, a local entrepreneur seeking guidance on a sustainable farming initiative, and a community health worker with proposals for elder care services. As Vernon parked outside the foundation's offices, located in a renovated historic building on Main Street, he noticed a new mural being painted on the adjacent wall. The artist, a young woman who had received one of the foundation's first art scholarships years earlier, was depicting the town's evolution from its agricultural roots to its current renaissance. Vernon paused to admire her work, particularly the segment showing the Gunderson Community Campus surrounded by families and bustling activity. The artist had captured not just the buildings, but the spirit of community they fostered. "What do you think, Mr. Palmer?" the artist asked, noticing his attention. "It tells our story beautifully," Vernon replied, genuinely impressed. "I'm adding something special here," she said, pointing to a small area near the campus entrance. The Jade Zodiac animals, representing how something unexpected can change everything. "That's what my grandmother always said about how this town transformed." Vernon smiled, touched by the symbolic inclusion. "Your grandmother is a wise woman. She worked at Palmer Construction back in the day," the artist explained. "Said you gave second chances to people when they needed them most." Vernon nodded, remembering how he had made a point of hiring local workers during Phoenix's early days, including many who had lost jobs when Blackwood construction collapsed. Those decisions, made partly from practical necessity and partly from community loyalty, had created generations of goodwill that no amount of money could buy. Inside the foundation offices, Vernon was greeted warmly by staff members who had come to view him not just as their boss, but as a mentor and friend. His assistant, Miguel, handed him messages and updated him on schedule changes before ushering in his first appointment. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with the meaningful work that had become Vernon's true legacy. By the time he finished his last meeting, the autumn sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows across Main Street. As Vernon left the building, he paused once more to look at the mural, now illuminated by the golden light of sunset. The artist had continued working through the afternoon, adding details that brought the scene to life. "It's coming along beautifully," he told her. "Thanks," she said, setting down her brush. "I'm trying to capture how one person's choices can ripple through an entire community. How building something positive can inspire others to do the same." Vernon couldn't have expressed his life's philosophy more perfectly. "That's exactly right," he said quietly. "That's exactly right." Walking to his car, Vernon felt the weight of the jade rat in his pocket, a constant reminder of how unexpected turns could lead to extraordinary destinations. Whatever time he had remaining, he would continue following the path he had chosen 20 years earlier, building a legacy not of revenge, but of renewal, creating opportunities for others to transform their own lives just as he had transformed his. As he drove home through the town that had both shaped him and been reshaped by him, Vernon Palmer felt a profound sense of contentment. The betrayal that had once defined him had become merely the first chapter in a much longer, richer story, one still being written in the lives of everyone touched by his journey from broken man to community builder. The Jade Rat, like Vernon himself, had traveled far from its origins. Both had found their true purpose not in what they had endured, but in what they had become afterward, symbols of resilience, transformation, and the enduring power of second chances. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.